Today, we will be reviewing the Gapscalper AI Expert Advisor by Mr. Ruben Octavio Gonzalez Aviles. Stick around to the end to see if this is a real EA or just another MQL5 scam. This video is sponsored by Prosperity Algo and our free Golden Time Bomb Expert Advisor. Do you want to make 100+% annual returns through automating the London breakout and the opening range breakout? Then click the link in the description. So reading the sales page, it's quite an interesting bot as he's mentioning that the strategy is primarily based on fair value gaps. And this is a real strategy. And if you guys know the Secret Impulse, which has recently hit a bit of a rough patch, is also based on a pretty similar strategy. And therefore it appears that this developer has put some thought behind it, and he does seem to actually be identifying a real trigger. However, I'm excited to kind of dive in a bit more to see how it works and the nuances behind it. And along with the concept of fair value gaps here, he's also mentioning that there's a proprietary reinforcement learning model which has been trained to identify hidden market inefficiencies. And every time people mention very, very complex AI-based techniques, it tends to make me a bit skeptical, not because you can't use AI in trading. AI can absolutely be used in trading. I have trained many machine learning models, as have many good developers, but especially when they start talking about really cutting edge stuff like reinforcement learning, you wonder if they actually implemented that, how they did that via just an expert advisor, if they have the correct infrastructure to even do that. So it's often not a great sign when you see them just name dropping AI. However, the rest of it looks rather intelligently thought out to date. And here as well, he discusses a few different types of strategies and a few different parameters, such as the fact that there's trailing entries, that there is a dynamic lot sizing. There's also even a recovery mode here, which could be interesting in this type of strategy, provided it's not a true martingale. Perhaps it just scales after one losing position, but a few different interesting parameters there that shows that he has put some thought to it. Specifically as well, this bot does trade gold specifically, which is it's kind of good to see that he's optimized it more for one particular bot as opposed to trying to fit something to a whole massive basket of pairs. And then he has a few other points here in regards to money management, trade settings, recovery. But really the big takeaway from this is that he really does appear to be using fair value gaps as the trigger. And it's cool that he's actually showing something which might be indicative of the logic behind the bot. And just to kind of show you guys what a fair value gap is, here he actually is identifying it reasonably correctly. And typically you're looking for a gap between two wicks. Here, it wouldn't be typically how I would look at it. Like I would view the fair value gap as this, right? Or I guess like here between this wick and this wick, that would typically be considered a fair value gap. Just think of it as like a 3 candlestick pattern where there's a large gap between the wicks of candle 1 and candle 3. And then effectively what the conventional trading strategy is you wait for a pullback into that zone, and then you wait for price to kind of reverse once liquidity and other orders have been triggered. And I actually did try to reverse engineer the Secret Impulse and put quite a bit of time behind it into trying to see if it's possible to make a strategy like this. And I actually did manage to come up with something which kind of worked, which does look similar to this. Effectively, you're detecting a large fair value gap as an impulse. You wait for a pullback into it, and then you place a pending order or a buy order above the fair value gap. So you trade essentially the projection out of that fair value gap. So this could very well be a profitable strategy because I was successfully able to kind of reverse engineer it. And if I can do it, other people can also do it. So it might very well be a real trigger, which is good to see. And the rest of it here, he's showing some exceptionally good backtests, as most MetaTrader developers would. So nothing super cutting edge there. But to kind of go over to his live signal so far, we're seeing a handful of trades which have happened over the past few days. And the good thing is, like, this is a real broker, and not all of the trades are profitable. So there's some winners, there's some losers. It appears to be using like a reasonable amount of leverage. So everything here is actually looking pretty solid. So one thing I would note is that this is just not a statistically significant amount of trades. But if we were to wait another 2-3 months where you had 100 trades here, it might very well be indicative. But at the moment, as much as it's good that we're seeing some winners, some losers, a good risk reward, we just don't have enough data to make any sort of like informed, intelligent decision about if this actually works. So now we can hop over to MetaTrader, where I've taken the liberty of downloading the Gapscalper and running a backtest. And the backtest is obviously massively manipulated. And it's kind of a pity because there might be a real strategy here, but for whatever reason, in the backtest, he's running a heavily manipulated backtest. And as somebody who sells expert advisors as well, like, I personally think this is the wrong approach to take because yes, it might be easier to fake your backtest, and even if you have a decent strategy, like, it's still not great, right? Because although even if like he has a real strategy, if his backtest looks like insanely good, your clients are going to be disappointed and you're still using false advertising. Whereas I think it's much better for people to be pleasantly surprised as opposed to be manipulated effectively into buying something. And that's why like this style of faking of the backtest is not a great idea. But what we're seeing here is he's turning $10,000 into $1.4 million within the span of a year, which is obviously completely false because here we're seeing a positive risk reward with a 91% win rate, or in fact, actually, sorry, it's a 92% win rate. And this is obviously completely impossible, right? If you were to see roughly, this is higher than the 2-to-1 risk reward, you would look for a win rate in excess of 33%. So if you saw a 40% win rate or a 45% win rate with this style of risk reward system, so high risk reward systems, that would be a phenomenal bot. But here, like, getting a scalping win rate with a super high risk reward, not super high, but a high risk reward, is just completely impossible because the edge over randomness would indicate that this is the clear, like the holy grail. So clearly there is massive amounts of manipulation here, but now if we actually go in, we can see perhaps if he really is trading fair value gaps. So let me go to the M5 maybe. And he also speaks to recovery being possible, and we're not seeing that here. Like, I'm not seeing any grids so far. Perhaps it's because it's more of an input parameter. So let's go through those. Here we have the dynamic lot sizing. We have trailing take profits. There is a so it is a grid martingale as well. So max recovery trades 0, turn off recovery, so it can open up to 6 recovery trades. So there will be some degree of grid martingale, and there's a news filter. Okay, so I would venture that in MetaTrader, as if you guys ever coded in MT5, you're able to detect if you're in a backtest or if you're in live trading. It's very simple. So effectively, what this guy is probably doing is in backtest mode, he's simply using a history reader, or he's using some heavily over-optimized parameters or settings because it does run reasonably quickly. So perhaps it's more like a predefined block of trades in backtest mode. Whereas in live, I would venture there probably is a real strategy here, but it's probably going to use a grid martingale and try and enter based on fair value gaps, but using an aggressive recovery system. And on gold specifically, this method is usually not a great idea because gold is so volatile. Using recovery with multiple trades is not a great idea. Like, I personally, in our Golden Time Bomb Pro, am a fan of using recovery, but only with one trade and with a fairly modest amount. Whereas if you just scale in, you can have some issues. But kind of one thing to note here is it is detecting fair value gaps, so it does appear to be trading based on that. And I've coded a very similar bot, and these would be classified as fair value gaps where it would detect one and then essentially wait for pullbacks into the zone and then buying. So there is a real strategy here, but unfortunately the backtest is so heavily manipulated, we just can't see if this is going to work. I would venture that when you run it live, there will be better performance, but really we need to just wait and see, watching the live signal to see if there's anything here or if it's just a heavily manipulated backtest. In conclusion, it's a bit of a pity because the guy put some thought into this. He really did try and develop at least a fairly well thought out bot, but unfortunately we just can't tell. So guys, hope you liked the video. Leave me a comment if you have any questions, and take care.